PCN is brought to you in part by the following underwriters.
This week on PCN Life, we bring you behind the scenes on the South Shore Conservatory's Rock Band program as we learn all that goes into these youth performing groups.
Darin Colucci is back to give us some more great information for youth as they embark on this thing called adulthood. But we begin with an in-depth look at recycling. And I'll kick this off to you, Julie. Do you recycle?
Absolutely. In my town, we put it all in one big barrel. We put everything together. And I'm glad I do it. But you found out a lot of things when you did this special on recycling.
All right, and I did because I've been recycling for what seems like forever, so I've always been under the impression that what I'm doing is a really good thing, and it is a really good thing. We're doing really good things, but there's a whole 50-step process that takes place after we put our stuff out and after we take it to the transfer station, and that's what we talk about in this next story. No matter what town you live in, there is one thing that's manufactured in every household in some way, shape, or form: trash and garbage. And really, since the late 1980s, households in nearly every town are making a lot more recyclables as well. We're at the point now where this symbol is as universal as this one, or even this one. In many cases, people that pay more attention to what they recycle are actually producing less trash and garbage. In my town, we've got the pay-as-you-throw program, and so far it's been an economically viable plan. You buy these special bags at the supermarket, which cost more than regular bags. That in turn makes you pay more attention to how much garbage you make. And since recycling is free, you start to pay more attention to how much you recycle, and usually recycle more. More often than not, the end result is a cheaper dump sticker. But that's not to say that it works in every town, because there are still some towns out there that haven't signed on to the plan at all. One such town is Kingston, where the measure was voted down at town meeting earlier in 2017. In turn, residents pay a $180 sticker fee rather than buy the special town bags, which average about $1 per bag. But that doesn't mean that people aren't still strongly encouraged to recycle at the transfer station. As part of its major renovation in 2013 and 14, this area was created to provide ample parking to go with several recycling bins. Even folks just bringing garbage still have to drive by this section to get to the hoppers. Despite having a higher sticker fee than they would if they had gone with pay-as-you-throw, people are recycling. The numbers are in, and so far, they're pretty good.
As far as your recyclables go, we average about maybe 3 to 4 tons of cardboard every 2 weeks, about 2 to 3 tons of commingle a week, and newspapers averaging maybe about 4 tons every 2 weeks.
For those unfamiliar with commingle, this is a combination of glass, metal, and plastic. It's an idea that's really taken off since the early 2000s to make it easier for the consumer. Before, everything was separated, like the way I still do in my basement. But commingle is really just one step away from single stream, which more often than not is how it's done if your recycles are picked up curbside. Sure, it's easier than having to sort through all of your paper, plastic, metal, and glass, but it's really not all it's cracked up to be.
Single stream recycling is kind of gaining traction with towns because they think that just because it captures more recycling as a whole compared to source separated or multi-stream recycling, the quality of the material is actually lower because a lot of people kind of get confused and think that they can put things in there that don't belong there, and that becomes contamination along with food and whatever else wasn't maybe washed out of a container or something. And so the biggest problem with that is a lot of loads are getting rejected because the people who deal with the material at the material recycling facilities don't want that material because it messes everything up and it devalues what they're trying to sell.
When those loads get rejected because of either contamination or too many things that just aren't recyclable, the cost gets absorbed by the town, which is eventually reflected in the tax bills of the residents, whether they know it or not.
When I work with the public, sometimes I'll try to explain the significance of recycling and why you should do it, and believe it or not, people will say, oh, I pay too many taxes to have to do this or something along that line of thought, and it just doesn't make any sense to me because if you don't recycle correctly or at all, your town's going to have to absorb the damage from not recapturing the value of that material, and in the end everyone pays more.
So while recycling correctly can save the consumer money, recycling itself is a business, and in some cases a pretty lucrative one. Part of that business chain includes vendors. They're the companies that accept the recyclables from the transfer station and bring them to their sites to go through the sorting process.
One place your recycles can go to is a facility like this one here in Weymouth, where behind me you can see a pile of cardboard about twice my height. All of this will eventually get cubed before it gets shipped off to end markets.
Now, before we get into what an end market is, let's talk about what this place is. This is Capital Paper Recycling, and they're the vendor for the Kingston Transfer Station. They're a materials recovery facility, also known as a MRF, and they take care of all of Kingston's cardboard, paper, and commingle. Since this place doesn't deal with single stream, the materials have already been sorted for the most part. Cardboard and paper in one section and commingle in the other. What the crews produce on any given day can depend on what is in demand for that day. For instance, on this day, they were running cardboard and paper because they had multiple shipments for paper coming in and they had to meet certain weight requirements. Sometimes it just depends on what the biggest pile is on that day, because if you thought the tonnage leaving Kingston was high, Capital Paper is taking in recyclables from at least 9 different towns.
Well, this facility right now is doing about 1,600 tons a month. So we run 5.5 days a week. So on an average day, we're probably doing about 70 tons a day.
Those tons appear in the form of these bales here, whether it's cardboard or plastics, and these are picked up and delivered to end markets. For cardboard, those end markets could be as close as the nearest paper mill, or in the case of plastic, it could end up overseas. It really comes down to who's offering the best price, and since these are commodities that are always in demand, the work is steady week in and week out.
We pre-ship for the next week. Typically starts Wednesday to Friday. We look at what's coming in, what historically we've got in. We do our metrics on that to know what do we need for the next week, besides any small anomalies that, a new piece of business that we may bring in.
A place like Capital Paper receives a majority of its materials from towns and municipalities, but the metals recycling market offers individuals a chance to cash in. It might require a little more elbow grease to haul it in, but it turns out that old scrap metal you might have lying around the house may have some value after all. One place you can take it to on the South Shore is Atlantic Metal in Hanson, Massachusetts. And while plastic and glass have low turnover or recapture rates, metal, along with cardboard and paper, is quite the opposite.
Metal, aluminum, paper, cardboard, all of those things generally, from all of the figures I've seen, have about 70% to 80% of all of that eventually ends up getting recaptured through recycling, which is very good. That's a very high rate. But plastics are more toward the 25 to 35%.
Come to Atlantic Metal on a Saturday and you'll see why those numbers are so high for metal recycles. What they take in here inside the building are non-ferrous metals, which means they do not contain iron, are not magnetic, and are usually more resistant to corrosion. That includes wires, computers, copper, brass, stainless steel, and aluminum, just to name a few. People come in, weigh it out, get paid, and that's when the real work begins for the crew.
So we buy the product from you. Once we buy it from you, we sort it into different categories. So there's, say, 5 different categories of wire. So we buy the wire from you in whatever category it applies. Then we separate it, put it in boxes, and when it's full, the box is full, we weigh it, and then we sell it to whoever's buying. There's several markets right now, so you have the foreign and domestic market mostly. So we'll sell to whoever's offering the best price at that time we sell.
They do deal in ferrous metal, but that stays on the outside. And no matter what people are bringing in, when it's busy here, this weigh station can look like the Southeast Expressway during rush hour. And of course, these metals are a commodity, so from here, they sell to whomever is paying the highest price, whether it's foreign or domestic.
So they come in with a truck, we load their truck, and they take it away. They typically take it to a shredder, which is in Boston, and they shred it, and then they put it on a barge and send it overseas. That's where it goes.
And that's what can be somewhat discouraging for the avid recycler. For those of us who spend time loading our cars and going through the paces of sorting and recycling, it would be nice to know exactly where it goes when all is said and done.
If the aim is to have a positive environmental impact, a good way to achieve that goal is by adhering to the basic principle of reduce, reuse, and recycle. And by that we mean reduce the amount of waste that we produce overall, reuse things like bottles and grocery bags, and of course, once you've exhausted all of your other options, recycle as much as you possibly can. And it's funny because we haven't even gotten around to what to do with our garbage. We'll have to save that for our next segment. For now, reporting from Atlantic Metal in Hanson, Massachusetts, I'm Brian Sullivan for PCN Life.
We are pleased to welcome back to PCN Life a Duxbury resident, a local author, an attorney, a coach, a real estate investor, Darin Colucci. It's great to have you back.
Nice to see you again, my friend.
Nice
How
to
are
have you back.
Thank
And we're
you.
lucky to have you on our board of directors now, too.
I'm honored. I've
Yes.
enjoyed that so far. Thank you.
We love to have you.
Thank you.
We're talking for the third time about a book that you wrote.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's called Everything I Never Learned in School, and it's about a guide to success.
Yes.
Now, I read it, loved it, sent it to my kids. We talked a little bit about it before, but for those people who did not see your first two interviews, can you just give a brief bio of the book?
Sure. It has become a passion of my life to try to help people figure out basically how to be happy. So even though success is in the title, it's as much about finding happiness as anything else, because as I grew up, I found out most people just weren't happy. They weren't happy in their job, they weren't happy in their relationship, everybody's unhappy. So I set out to figure out why, and there is a formula to be happy and successful and fulfilled, and I committed it to paper, and I'm very proud of it. It's done very well, and it's seemingly helping a lot of people.
Yeah. I've followed you on your website, and a lot of different ages and different groups really have honed in on this. Now, in your table of contents of your book, you really talk about the chapters. It all begins with your thoughts. Don't let fear get in your way. Always ask for advice. Can you kind of just give a rundown of how you chaptered this book?
I think very logically. I think in a linear fashion.
Okay.
So I decided the best way to do it is to lay out the steps in order.
Right.
So I tried to think of what is the very first thing that holds people back and make that the first thing they're going to deal with in the book.
Okay.
So one thing leads to another.
Yeah.
And then when they've conquered that, they say, okay, I'm ready for step 2. And step 2 is actually step 2, not step 25,
Right.
and then you go back.
Yeah.
And it's worked. People read that and they say the way it's laid out really made sense to them.
Yeah.
And that's just what people are telling me. I really appreciate the compliments, but I've heard that more than just about anything.
Right.
That it reaches them on a level where it really makes sense.
Right.
It's real world advice that they can put into practice right away. And that's why I laid out the chapters the way I did.
That you did. Okay. Now, we've talked about how, like I said, gee, I wish I had had this when I was in school, that it would have been really helpful as
Me too.
as a high school student, even a junior high student. But you found that age group isn't engaging as much as the older age group. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's been a shocker. I
Yeah.
wrote it for younger people.
Right.
The goal when I put pen to paper was I'm going to help these young people avoid all these things that we've had to deal with in our life.
Exactly.
So then I write it and I find out that people in their 40s and 50s and 60s are reading it
Yeah.
and changing their lives. But I was having trouble getting people who were 18, 19, and 20. To them, I think it was homework. They were looking at it like, their teacher gave them the Andromeda strain and said, you got to read this. So I have to get in front of them somehow.
Yeah.
And I really tried to talk to principals and, in one instance, someone who's in charge of education for the county to say, can you just give me a little time, not just a class, but maybe an assembly, maybe just a way to get in front of them so I can explain why this book is different. This book is a collection of wisdom. Wisdom you can't learn in school.
Right.
It's just not going to help you. Wisdom is how you're going to get from A to B and take all the education that you learned in school and put it into practice to make yourself successful and, most importantly, happy.
That's right, and make you happy. So sometimes I guess people have to learn it for themselves. It's like Dorothy, next time I go looking for my heart's desire, I won't look past my own backyard. I mean, sometimes you really have to go through the experience yourself. So how can parents who've been through many of experiences help students navigate through and understand how valuable the lessons in this book are to them?
One of the reasons the book is successful is, I think, when the reader starts getting into it, the book builds credibility. And as they're going through it, they start believing the stories and seeing them because it's all making sense. Well, I can't talk to every single person that may read it.
Right.
Who has more credibility than a parent? So if a parent said to a child over dinner, hey, look, this summer you have this reading list that you have to read, that you don't want to read. I got something for you to read that's going to help you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And don't think of it as homework. Think of it as this is the roadmap to success, happiness, and fulfillment. And it'll take you about 2.5 hours to read it.
Right.
It's this big.
Right.
But you got to read it by the end of the summer. And I think if they could just get the kids at that age, 16, 17, 18, it'll help their decision making. It'll help their outlook. It'll help their positive mindset because they'll see real world examples of how it's helping people and, more importantly, how it holds people back. They'll be now in tune to it. And that's why I think parents should get involved It's like anything. If your kids aren't doing it and it's good for them, somehow you got to nudge them in the
Right,
right direction.
right,
It's your
right,
job as a
right.
parent.
And I loved when I read this, the different examples you used they're not people that have like been dead for 100 years. You know,
No.
I mean, you give a couple examples of people that you quote or people that you use in this book.
Well, there's on purpose, there were a number of people that you have heard of, and
Yep.
more importantly, people that you haven't heard of.
Right.
And the reason is, I have this theory that if you talk about Oprah and you talk about George Clooney, people just see them as different. They're life's lottery winners, and they're great looking, or just super smart, or it's somebody like the guy who runs Tesla, Elon Musk.
Oh.
They're different than us.
Oh, yeah.
So I gave examples of like Sarah Blakey, who started Spanx.
Yeah, who's Sarah Blakey?
No
Right,
one
right.
knows,
No.
but she's a self-made billionaire.
Yeah, because
And
of Spanx.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure I had a number of women in there because I wanted young ladies to know, hey, you can do it too.
Yeah.
I don't know what anyone's telling you at home or at school,
Yeah.
but you're no different than anybody else.
Right.
If you follow these steps, you can be that successful. And one of the second or third steps is you have to be able to see yourself as being successful.
Right.
If you think it's impossible,
Right.
it's not going to work for you.
That's
you
right.
have to be able to get to a point where you say, you know something, I can do it too. I don't have to be George Clooney. I can do it too.
Right.
And then you're really 90% of the way there. No one believes that. Once you accept that it's possible,
Right.
you're 90%
Kind of the
towards
way
your
there.
goal.
Last time we were together, you said the most successful people in the world are no different than you and me.
It's so
Talk
true.
about that.
They were lost as children. Some of them, many of them, didn't graduate college.
Right.
Now, I'm not advocating not going to college.
Right.
I'm just pointing out that there's more than one way to get where you want to be.
Right.
So when I started researching this and talking to people and learning about people and reading biographies, I found out they had every problem you and I have.
Yep.
They had a failed marriage. They were lousy students. They had dyslexia and never told anybody.
Yeah.
In some cases, they had some terrible thing that happened to them as a child. But they persevered,
Right.
and they somehow either intuitively understood this or somebody explained it to them. They had a mentor
Right.
that said, let me show you how to do this.
Right.
And they laid out the steps, they followed the steps, and they became this superstar that people look at now and say, oh my God, that person's phenomenal.
Right.
No, they're just like you or me.
Right.
They just understood this information.
And your point about every single step you take, if you fail, it's not really a failure because
It's built into it.
Yeah.
You're going to have some miscalculations here and
Absolutely.
there. I don't know of a single person. Think about the most successful people on earth.
Yeah.
Their trajectory was not like this.
No.
It went,
Yep.
and they kept trending upward,
Upward,
like a good
right.
stock. It
Yeah.
goes down, but
Yeah,
it keeps
yeah.
trending upward.
Right.
So they look at things differently, and that's part of what we're teaching in this book is mindset.
Yeah.
They look at a failure as a course correction. It's, okay, where did I go wrong there?
Yep.
Let me see. That's where the answer is. You know something? Now that I've solved that problem, now your line shoots up.
Right.
And then you run into another problem. The most successful people, the richest people, are the ones that solve problems.
Right.
Every tremendously successful person saw a problem that everyone else saw as insurmountable.
Yeah.
And said, I'm going to go over it, under it, or through it.
Yeah,
But I'm
but I'm
getting
gonna
to
get
the
to
other
it. Right,
side.
right.
And when they do, they get all the marbles.
Right. So talking about this really helps. I noticed just after reading your book and then talking to you about it, it brought a lot more things clear to me. Now, you are going to have the opportunity of actually having a show on a radio station.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. Talk about that.
Well, it so feeds into what we were talking about, because one of the things in the book is you have to have goals.
Right.
And sometimes you're not positive how you're going to get there. And that stops people.
Yeah.
They have this tremendous goal and they think, well, but I don't know how to do it. I thought, I got to reach more people. I would love a radio show.
Yeah.
I really didn't do anything to make that happen. And then somebody called me from Dash Radio. It's a satellite radio station that wants to compete with Sirius.
With
and said,
Sirius, yeah, I've heard of them. Yeah.
we read your book and we love it and we'd like to know, would you like to have a 1-hour show? I said,
that's great.
I couldn't have said yes fast enough. Now I have no radio experience whatsoever. Zero.
Yep.
So I felt what everybody else feels. Do I know how to do this? Am I going to be any good at it? Am I cut out for it? But I immediately said, yes, I'll figure it out.
That's right.
And again, one of the things you want to talk about in the book, you try to get across to people, is that feeling is common. It's human nature. But
Right.
don't let it stop you, for God's sakes. Don't let that be the thing that
Right.
holds you back, that I
Right.
simply don't know how to do it.
That's right.
So Richard Branson said, whenever you get a great opportunity, say yes and then figure it out.
Right, right.
He's 100% right.
Don't say no.
And
right.
that's what I did.
Any
with
way you
this.
can do it, you should do it.
Correct.
Okay. So the book is Everything I Never Learned in School, Guide to Success by Darin Colucci. You can read it. You can read it with your kids. You can give it to your parents. You can give it to anybody. And there's no age group that won't benefit from it, I don't think. I mean, I've read it 3 times now. And I just love it because it's, you know what it is? It's uplifting. It's absolutely uplifting, and it makes anybody think that anything is possible.
Yeah, it's been overwhelming for me.
Yeah.
I had someone write to me who's 59 years old, which is not old, but it's not 20.
Yep.
And she said, I've always had a dream of doing something. I read your book, and I'm doing it.
Yeah.
She said, I left my job, I have enough money to try this, and I'm setting out on my own course to do my own thing. And I couldn't have had a better compliment.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
great.
thrilling.
That's
It really
wonderful.
was. Thank you very much.
Tells it all.
Thank
Okay.
you.
We'll have you back sometime in the future.
Anytime you
All
want.
right,
I want
sir.
to have you on my show.
Okay.
All right. I'm telling you.
We'll
You're
talk
on my
about that.
show.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know it's only rock and roll, but I like it. The Rolling Stones may not have known it at the time, but that idea has been making its way into music education in a big way. It's not often you associate the word conservatory with rock and roll, but South Shore Conservatory is bridging that divide. Over the past year, PCN Life has been chronicling the growth of the rock band program. We attended shows, festivals, recording sessions, and spoke in depth about the profound impact collaborative music can have on a young person's life experience. And these are not your average garage bands that you might have been in as a teen. These are seasoned, dedicated, well-rehearsed musicians who have had the opportunity to learn about being in a band from an unlikely source, a conservatory.
It's a really special program that when I was asked to be a part of it, I didn't realize how big it was going to be. Didn't realize how much of my time I was going to put into it, and I didn't realize how much time I was going to want to put into it either. It's been probably one of the most fulfilling experiences of my teaching career, for sure.
Tell the story of rock band at SSC and kind of how we got from being in the basement to filling up the New World Tavern, filling up the Middle East, releasing music, collaborating with artists. Okay, now I'm just stalling. Okay, here we go.
Eric always says to me, he says, private lessons are great, he says, but there's always going to be a type of kid that doesn't attract. And that type of kid is the type of kid that wants to play with others. And so that's what's so extraordinary about the rock band. And I think in the rock and roll world, it is that playing together. That's what that genre is. For us, building a rock band program and finding leadership around it with Eric Calderon was a really important thing for us to identify and implement.
The rock band program isn't just classes. It's very community-based, which is one of the missions here at the Conservatory, and a mission for me with music in general is to bring more music to the community. The rock band program started through a faculty initiative, and it wasn't actually my own initiative at first. I got here to South Shore Conservatory in 2012, and there was a guitar teacher here named Cliff Williams, and he had the idea of forming rock bands and teaching them classes. And so he did that for a little bit, and he ended up moving to Michigan, and I thought I'd love to continue that program and kind of do my own thing with it, find ways to build on the momentum that he already generated instead of letting the momentum that he generated kind of die off. And once a ball that big gets rolling, it's often easier to just kind of follow it and hold on than it is to even try to stop it. Toast is the band that's had the most opportunity to perform, record a 3-song demo, 2 songs professionally at Mad Oak Studios. The performances have been across the South Shore, into Boston at the Middle East, and that's been because of the Dave Jodka Scholarship for Future Rockers, which is funded by the Mad Love Music Festival and started by Kathleen Jodka, whose family suffered a really major loss of her husband, Dave, and they took that and made something really great with it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that Dave believed and we believe that, and I think most everybody would agree with us, that music has this powerful way of bringing people together, of connecting us. no matter what. And I think that often that is most felt in a live situation, and to be able to stand in front of a stage and to really witness and watch and feel live music is hard to compare to anything else.
Also amazing.
It is amazing. Yes, it's really amazing.
These are kids that really deserve the opportunity. There was a selection process where about 15 kids applied. And these 5 kids got it. Not because they were the best players. They did happen to be the best players, but because they formed the best band. I can definitely say, judging by our text thread, all 5 of them are best friends. And not only are they best friends, they're so good with Kathleen's kids who come out to these shows. They come to the Middle East. They come to New World Tavern, and they're like our biggest fans. They come in Toast shirts, you know? So it's like this big full circle thing where, yeah, these kids are getting a serious musical experience. They're able to do things that I really didn't get to do for real until college, maybe even after. And they're doing it, some as freshmen. These rock bands are saying something different because we're creating a space where you can say whatever you want musically. And as kids start to say whatever they want, it's really liberating, and they start to think outside the box. And once you get kids thinking outside the box with electric guitars and a drum set and a bass, things get kind of cool. And it's still rock because people don't really know how to box it in. And we are the jazz rock pop department, and it's not quite jazz, and it's certainly not pop, so it's rock.
To rock out in a band is basically people are relying on you to get it right. But if you get it wrong, it doesn't matter. Because as long as you have fun and you pay attention to everything that's happening, it's awesome.
We used to be very nervous. Now we're just fans.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Like as a parent, you get a little nervous when your kid goes on stage, and we're like, she's got this.
So a father of one of the girls in the band says, everyone has that mad desire to reach for something larger, to be part of something bigger than themselves. Mad love brought that to our daughter, that wonderful, brilliant connection between a great heart and the great wonder beyond her. She thinks bigger, she sees farther, and she connects more deeply.
I like rock because it doesn't mean that much. It's just rock. It's a feeling, it's a sense of getting together with your friends and making something that only you could make. So when I bring these kids together, I don't flat out say that, but I try to coach them in a way and run rehearsals in a way that, yeah, anything kind of goes in here. You want to try that section next to that section? Oh, but I usually don't hear it that way. Like, that's not, I've never heard that on the radio. It's like, that, all the more reason to do that.
We hope you enjoyed tonight's show. You can find more about PCN Life at PACTV.org.
Each story is also on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram as well for more behind-the-scenes info on all of our stories.
We'll see you in 2 weeks for another new PCN Life.